You're going to need to have your text editor open as well as some kind of web browser. So I've got my HTML file open in both places. The first thing we're going to look at are font weights. On the right side of my screen, I've got my website, my web page open. And you can see I have quite a few different weights of font here, from thinnest to thickest. If you take a look inside of my text editor, you can see that I'm pulling in a font from Google. This is called Lato. And there's some numbers here that we need to take a look at. 100, 300, 400, 700, and 900. Those are the different weights of the font. 100 is the thinnest, 900 is the thickest. They go in increments of 100 usually. So you'd get 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700, 800, and 900. However, this particular font doesn't have a weight for each one of those. It only has one for 100, 300, 400, 700, and 900. Let's see how that's going to play out when we render it in the browser. So here's my page. And I've got my lightest one up here. Number 1 stands for 100, 200, 300, 400, etc. You can see I've got them labeled over here with classes the same way, so those numbers correspond to each other. If you take a look at numbers 1 and 2, they pretty much look the same. If you remember, back up here, there is no such thing as the 200. So that's why those two things look the same. The next one is 3. That's 300. Oh, and sure enough, there's a difference in the font weight, and there's also a different number up here. So that's a good thing. And let's just go through the next couple. 4 and 5 look to be the same. 6 and 7 look to be the same. 8 and 9 look to be the same. And numbers 4 and 5, there is a 400, but there's no 500. So the browser is defaulting down to 4 for this particular weight. If you look at 600 and 700, oh, sure enough, we do have a 700 up there. So 600 is defaulting up to 700. 800 and 900 are looking the same. There's no 800 specified from Google, so the browser is just automatically assuming you want to go up to 900. So what this means is that if the font weight doesn't exist, your browser is going to choose the best fit for you. So those are the numbers for our weights here. Now you can do other things as well. Now you'll notice inside of your text editor that I have some terms up here in addition to those weights, those numbers. These terms are normal, bold, bolder, and lighter. Let's see how this is going to play out with what we have on our rendered HTML file. Let's take that first weight, replace the 100 and put normal in there. Save your file, refresh your page. That looks pretty good, huh? So just eyeballing this, it doesn't look like this is the same as number 3. It looks like it's the same as number 4. So that's your 400 weight. That's pretty much what you would expect to be a regular font. Okay, it's pretty middle of the road. Let's try something different. Let's try the bold now and see what that would map to. Okay, bold. And it looks like a number 6 or 7, so that would be a 700 weight. Here's the last one, bolder. Now I would expect it to be this guy, but it's not. I think it's more like 6 or 7 again, so I'm going to say more like 700. So using those terms, I wasn't able to get the boldest of the bold. Let's see what happens on the other end, the lighter. Okay. All right, that's not too bad. So we did get the 100 level there. I'm going to return this back to normal, and I would suggest that you do the same. Okay, looks good. So what conclusions can we draw from that? You get greater control if you use the numbers. rather than the adjectives. So I'd suggest getting familiar with them, getting comfortable with them, and check inside whatever font program you're using, if it's Google Fonts or Typekit, and see what their numbers are going to correspond to so that you can set your own expectations correctly for your font weights. Let's go on and take a look at kerning. If you'll remember from the lecture, kerning is the letter spacing between two characters if we're talking about web terms. Kerning also applies to tracking for us, so we have to come out this code just a little differently for each one. With kerning, you're going to have to apply it through a span tag. So let's go down here and look at this, at the HTML for my kerning. Okay. The web page shows the big gap between the R and the N. That is obviously very badly kerned text there. If you take a look at my HTML, you can see that I've got a span tag wrapped around the R. So that's how I'm getting that particular space. Let's come back up here and take a look at what I have for my property. It's the letter spacing property, and I've got it set to 20 pixels. Now let's reduce that down to 10. See what that looks like. Not great. I'm going to reduce it down to 0. There we go. Now, just for grins, let's see what happens if I set it to a -5. Ah, yeah, that's bad. So where would you use this kind of kerning practice with that span tag? You would use it whenever you have to have live text in the header. Now, what I mean by live text is text that you write on a page with an H1 or an H2 or H3 header element. Headers are something that Google uses quite a bit for categorizing your information on your page. So the more you have live text, the better you are off in your Google searches. So let's take a look at the next place where we're going to use letter spacing, and that's in tracking. Let's scroll up a little bit and take a peek at the tracking example over here. Oh my goodness. You can see that letter spacing is equally applied on every single letter. Now, this is not a great example, is it? Okay. You're probably never ever going to do something like this unless you have to teach this class. Okay. I definitely abused my letter spacing here. You may get to a point with some kind of font, especially a display font, where you have multiple words in the title that you're trying to work with, multiple words in the header, and you have to do something with a letter spacing of like 2 pixels or something. And just, you need to apply it on such a global level, and that's okay. Try to use this kind of tracking for those rather than for body text if you can. Okay, I'm going to undo that. Oops. I'm going to undo this. The next one we're going to take a look at is word spacing. Word spacing is different from tracking in that we're manipulating this little bit here, equivalent of you pressing the space bar. We're doing that rather than manipulating the space in between each and every character. Okay. This one can be a little tricky. I'm zoomed way in on my browser here, but I do have this justified, and I think that you're going to see that nicely on your particular machines. Word spacing is most often used on justified text. And the reason why we use that is to get rid of rivers. Again, if you remember from the lecture, rivers are those vertical spaces that flow through this kind of type, and they make it very difficult to read. So let's see if we can work on this a little bit. That's better. So I took it down quite a bit. I went from 7 pixels of word spacing down to 2 pixels of word spacing, and I have gotten rid of quite a few of those. Well, there's one there. So I'd have to work on that a little bit. You do have some extra options when we start talking about CSS3. Those options are going to be available to you later in the semester. Now let's take a look at your horizontal alignments. And by horizontal alignments, I'm talking about aligned left, aligned right, centered, justified, and even indenting the first line of your text. Now, scroll up in your editor, and let's see this guy. So this is what I have set on my paragraph down there. That's email. You can always stop the movie and go down there and take a look at it if you'd like to. Currently, I have my text aligned to left, a text indent set of 50 pixels. Left applies to flush left, ragged right. Right will apply to flush right, ragged left. Centered is centered. Centered is center. Justified will be justify when you're working with your CSS properties. So let's play with this just a fraction here. Change it from left to right. Make sure you take a look at what's going to happen to your text indent. There we go. That's not too bad. Sometimes this doesn't work so well. If you just click and grab it and drag, you'll see what I'm talking about. But that time it did. If it doesn't work on your particular alignment, feel free to just take it out. Okay, let's take a look at centered, which we will type in as center. And there it is, ragged on both sides. And finally, justify. And there it is. It's really that easy. So once again, I have that printed here on your browser. That information. Flush left is just called left. Flush right is right. Centered is center. Justified is justify. And if you want to move that first line of text, use text indent for your CSS property. Okay, guys, let's move on. Let's talk about your vertical alignments. There are two things that affect the vertical alignment. That's line height, as well as top and bottom margins. Now, you'll notice that I'm not even going to talk about that vertical dash align property. That thing drives me insane. I'm going to give you a better recommendation, so hang on if you're wondering about that. For right now, we're going to talk about the line height and the margins. For my particular line height, if you look on the browser page, that first paragraph has a lot more space than the last two. That's because the line height property I have set has the number 2 on it. So what those numbers mean is that you multiply the number that you see times the current font size. So in this case, my font is at the default, which is 16 pixels. So 16 times 2, that means I'm going to have a 32 line height. If you set it to 1.5, that would bring it down to 24 pixels of line height. That's all that means. So whatever this number is times your default body font size. Okay. The next part we're going to look at is how to space between your paragraphs. And by the way, all of this acts like leading, if you're thinking about that particular typographic term. The margins, you can push from the top, you can push from the bottom. I currently have it set to 3Ms, and I'm pretty sure that you guys are very familiar with your margins thanks to Web 125, so we're not going to really look at that. But I want to come back to that vertical align property that I had mentioned just before. It doesn't work on block level elements like paragraph tags and H1 tags. You can use line height instead. There are many, many different tutorials that are out there. My favorite tutorial is this guy. If you're not familiar with hungkiat.com, I would suggest that you guys go take a look at that website. Wonderful, wonderful tutorials all over the place. But he gives you 6 different tricks here to align something vertically. So just figure out which one would work the best for you in your particular project. Okay, guys, that is our brief introduction to working with those types of alignments and weights for typography for our class. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. I'll see you in the next movie.